He said, I got rid of annual reviews, got rid of them. He said, they're a waste of time. He says, the young people that are working for me today think a nude paper at 24 hours is outdated. So the idea that they're going to be engaged with content that could be almost a year old, especially content that's so important about their performance, it's a waste of their time. He replaced it with a stay interview. The interview occurs within the first 60 days of employment, then followed by every 6 months, they receive a stay interview.
Hey, Nicole, what do you get when a former corporate CEO and a do-gooding executive walk into a recording studio?
Well, Aaron, nothing, because the two of us are usually on my couch or Zoom because wine.
You get a podcast created for Gen X women who are bought into the corporate world, but fed up with the BS.
I know. It's how to thrive the 9 to 5 or 6 or 7.
It's career therapy. It's comedy. It's definitely full-on authenticity. Basically, we give you tangible strategies to rise in your career without compromising everything else.
Because work doesn't have to suck.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck podcast, where we help Gen X-ish leaders who should be at the top of their career, but just don't feel like they are. This is Erin Hatzakostas. I'm one of the co-hosts, the founder of Be Authentic Inc., and my co-host, Nicole Licata Grant, is off doing real work today while I do another interview. And today we get to talk to Meagan Johnson, who is a speaker, a humorist, and an expert on multi-generations. And she's been studying this stuff since 1997. I was reflecting with her and I was like, I did some math, and in 1997, the older boomers were like in their early 30s. So she's seen a lot. She's spoken a lot. She's reflected a lot. And also she has just tons of great stories. So some of the things that we talk about are, first, how she decided to really stop being miserable at her corporate jobs and instead focus on and take the bull by the horns on something that really fascinated her and frustrated her. We talk about the biggest thing that people got wrong about millennials, such a fun reflection because a lot's going on there. She shares this insanely creative way that one leader that's been part of her programs uses to incentivize employees to essentially form bonds and relationships. And no, it's not forcing people back into the office. It's so creative. You'll learn what a stay interview is. One company basically threw out their annual reviews, got rid of them altogether, and replaced it with these instead. Really fascinating. And then you'll also hear why you need to stop saying, I'm too busy, and get some tough love coaching around that and what to say and think instead. That's really empowering. So without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Meagan Johnson. It sounds like from your bio, you've been doing this generational work since 1997.
No.
I need to know why. And then I'm curious because doing a little math, boomers were like older boomers were in their early 30s. Our generation, Gen X, I was, doing, funnel bombs of beer about that time in college, right? And obviously we didn't have, sort of millennials, Gen Z, et cetera. So what got you into this field?
So I was 27 when I started doing this. So I graduated from Arizona State and I got a degree in business. And then this was in 1993. I don't know if you remember, it was a huge recession going on. And everybody was saying...
I don't, because that's when I went into college and was oblivious to the real world for 4 years. 4.5 years, yeah.
So there was a huge recession going on. And everyone, all my friends were all graduating from college, and everyone's joking, oh, there are no jobs. We're gonna be working those minimum wage jobs that we worked all the way through college. There's no jobs. And Quaker Oats came to Arizona State, and they were on campus recruiting. And it's one of those fluky things. This is back before we had cell phones. I was standing in my parents' bedroom, and the phone rang, and I answered it. And it was a recording saying, if you're interested in having an interview with Quaker Oats, press 1. It's like, yes, because I just graduated college and I have no job.
At least you could press a button at that time. Those were new. Those were probably new on telephones.
It was actually a cordless phone. So you could actually leave the room.
Yeah. Very modern.
So I went and I interviewed, and it was the one and only corporate interview I had, and they offered me the job. I was over the moon. I was so excited. I got a company car at the time for more money than I'd ever made before.
Yep.
And, of course, my parents might have the most supportive parents in the world. They're so excited. Oh, great, congratulations. And all my friends, how'd you do that? How'd you get a job? I'm like, just I made the right stuff. You know how you are when you're in your 20s. So
Yeah.
oh, so I got this job with Quaker Oats in sales, which is exactly what I wanted to do all through college. I wanted to get into sales, and I absolutely hated the job. I hated the job so hard, and it was so frustrating because here are all my friends telling me, "Gosh, we've got this great job," and my parents and their friends, "Oh, congratulations to you." And I hated it. I put on weight. I would come home and just, I mean, it was a classic. So happy it was Friday, and then Sunday would roll around and I dreaded it. Now, again, in my 20s, blinders on. And as an adult, I can look back and see some mistakes I made. However, what I found to be really frustrating was, so at the time I had boomer bosses. I didn't identify with that at the moment, but I had boomer bosses who also happened to be men, boomer bosses who had just this really a different idea of when it was okay to communicate with me. So, for example, this was before everybody home office, but we home office. We worked here in Phoenix, where I live. You home office, so which was kind of new. Luckily, my dad had home office all through my high school years.
Meaning like work at home. Like
you work at home. Yeah, you work at home. Yeah, you work at home. There was no office to go to, which was very, like in 1993, it was very strange.
Right.
But there were no cell phones. You didn't have a cell phone. So my boss would call me on Sunday evening at my house. And I just thought that was really intrusive. My weekend, I don't get, you get in the corporate world, you get 2 days. And I remember my dad, who's also a baby boomer, I've been complaining about it to my dad. My dad says, "Well, he's your boss. Of course he can call you." I'm like, no, that's just, to me, that was just so invasive of my personal time. And so it was a combination of just I had different expectations, and my bosses had different expectations of what motivated me, what was appropriate ways to communicate. The telephone calling me on a Sunday night as an example. And so as we kind of moving through the 90s, everybody, the press, was complaining about Generation X, how hard Generation X was to deal with. We were called the gold collar workers, which I always tell my audience, that's not a compliment.
Wrong. I've never heard that.
It's not a fashion accessory. Yeah. It's not a compliment. And so I, of course, now I'm 27, arrogantly think to myself, I can tell you how to do this. And so that's how I started talking exclusively about how to work with Generation X. And the target was baby boomers. How do you recruit and retain and work with the younger workforce? And then as, time goes by.
When you say you talked about it, were you still in your Quaker Oats sales job and you said, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, though, and sort of be a thought leader and sort of change the dynamic? Or was this like something separate? You ran away from the big girl job?
I had transitioned to, I worked for Kraft Foods, and then I worked for Xerox, and it was something in the back of my mind that I knew I wanted to do. And I decided I'm just going to do it. And again, fortunate that I was in my 20s and too arrogant to realize what I didn't know. Starting my own business. But then started talking about how to work with the different generation, how to work with Generation X. And then as, a couple of years go by, you no longer are the youngest person in the room. And now, what we were calling them Gen Y at the time, but now we call them Millennials. They started coming into the workforce and everybody focused on them. So baby boomers were staying in the workforce longer. So the what I talked about evolved into talking about all the generations versus just exclusively about Generation X. So that's currently what I do. I talk about all the generations. Baby boomers, definitely less baby boomers in the workforce now, especially post-COVID. And now, of course, you see more and more Gen Zers, which is really exciting.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was dying to ask you, so I'm a little bit of a pastor. I think you are too. And we see all this generational stuff, and it's interesting, but also it can start to feel like cliche, or you know what it's sort of repeatable, and you're sort of zone out from it.
Yeah.
I want to know, for example, let's start with millennials, just because that's been the more recent, and they've kind of gone the gamut in the last 20 years, from sort of the cool shiny object to now, like, people realizing they're actually old.
They have management positions of authority. They have kids. Yeah. They're not
They're
like the
big. They are
corporate.
they are adulting somewhat. What did we think back when that generation was first coming? What was one of the sort of most common things we talked about that you think we got wrong?
Oh, that they're entitled narcissists.
Mm.
And in fact, Time Magazine called them entitled narcissists. And I bring that up. I'm just moving to turn on a light. I bring that up in my events where I say, we called this generation entitled narcissists. But no, they're not. Millennials, really are trying to make a really big difference, I think. And I think, we're responding to, and I make this point in my program, and I have the groups do an exercise where we actually bring out all the generational stereotypes. What we're saying about the generations has not changed. We say the same thing about every younger generation, just a different way, but it's always negative. And it's hilarious to me to hear the millennials now complain about Generation Z. Oh, it's just so different than when we grew up. In fact, this morning at the gym, I heard two millennials talking. Oh gosh, the young people just don't understand. They didn't grow up like we did. And then
Yeah.
and all of a sudden everybody, went to school and was uphill both ways and snowing.
I love it.
I do too. It cracks me up because I bring up this point that we say the same thing about every younger generation. So the generational stereotypes haven't changed. I say what has changed are what I call generational signposts. And those are events that really define a generation. And those change. And that's why we have different expectations of the different generation.
Tell us about signposts. So take, Gen Z, the most sort of recent up and comers. What's a signpost? What does that mean for them? What does that look like?
So let me back up a little bit on generational signposts. So an example I use with my audience is I'll say, so how many of you, when you were a kid, your school was going to have a fundraiser, sell candy? If you ask people our age or older, you say, how do you sell that candy? And everybody says, well, door to door, or you maybe you're a Girl Scout, door to door. You ask people, okay, so how do you sell your kids candy today? And online, or we go to the grocery store, we stand there with our kids. There's a dad in our neighborhood who makes a big sign, and he jumps out in front of all the cars, and his daughter's like standing over the side like this. And I always jokingly say to the audience, yeah, we just buy it all. That's how we sell our kids candy.
Yeah.
My point being that those of us who sold candy door to door, or maybe especially baby boomers had a paper route, we had generational signposts that taught us time management skills, money handling skills, customer service skills. Well, those generational signposts are gone. And that's true of all of us. No matter who you are, where you are on the generational timeline, a Gen Xer, a millennial, a baby boomer, a Gen Zer, we all have these generational signposts that change. But our expectations of people are in part shaped by our generational signposts. You asked about Generation Z. The big one, obviously, is those, especially the older Gen Zers who just entered the workforce 3 years ago. They came into the workforce when we were still in the middle of lockdown. So they finished their college career or high school. They finished their education in the middle of COVID, the lockdown. They're beginning their careers, many of them beginning their careers when things were still locked down. And now organizations are trying to find that right balance between home officing or working from home, coming into the office, or some kind of hybrid situation. So that's a real big generational signpost for Generation Z, just because of where they are in their career. Very different than like you or me, who, even if I had to go into an office, the home officing thing, it's like, I have my relationships established professionally. I'm not dependent on having to go to work to meet people. We're just at a different stage in our career. Here comes Gen Z. So that's going to be a really big generational signpost for Generation Z.
Sure, that makes sense.
And how organizations are going to move forward. And my clients are really struggling with that question. How do we create the right balance of working remotely versus coming into the office? And not only creating the right balance, but how do we maintain the culture that has brought quality people to us for years? So how do we maintain that spark, that spice, when we've got people, working in different locations?
Hey, did you know that August 16th is National Roller Coaster Day? So it's so ridiculous. I freaking hate roller coasters. So whatever. But it is also National Authenticity Day on August 16th. And here's the coolest thing about National Authenticity Day. Besides, us being obsessed with authenticity, you can actually make someone else's day. And you don't get to do this very often. Every year, we, The Authentic Inc., the company that's behind this podcast, sponsors what we call the National Authenticity Awards. And it culminates on National Authenticity Day. And that's just when we recognize leaders, everyday workers, and companies that inspire the crap out of others with their authenticity. And you should totally nominate someone. I mean, can you think of a better way to give back to someone you work with than putting them on the grandstand of the authenticity goats? It's cheap, it's free, and it's such a great thing to do. So to nominate someone or a company, it's easy peasy. You just go to nationalauthenticity.day.com and click on the link in the upper left-hand corner. Nominate them now. So stop listening, go nominate. It's interesting because, first of all, obviously my network are more in sort of the Gen X realm because I'm almost 50. I'm a Gen Xer. But my friends who are impacted by this, who did used to 5 days a week go in, they're just as pissed. So the signpost is sort of spreading like wildfire. And what I had never thought about this before, but as I'm reflecting on my experience, like one of my promotional things for companies, if you're listening, advertise that you can find a partner. Like I moved out to Connecticut for my job from Michigan. And I only dated 3 guys before I got married. And all 3 of those I met at Aetna, where I worked corporate office. So like maybe we need to bring back more of like, the dating scene. Like maybe there could even be a tagline, like, a real live dating app, come work in the office and find people when they're sober and real or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because I do talk about the importance of friendships at work, especially with your generation. So how do you create that when you have people working remotely?
Yeah.
And one of the examples I use is one of my clients. What he did was he said to his group, if there's 4 of you that are out and about in a social situation and you can take a picture of you guys being out and about together, I will pay for the activity.
Oh my gosh. How progressive is that?
He says, no questions asked. He said, but you have to show me that the 4 of you are doing something, and it's 4 people from that work for the company go and do something. He says, I'll pay for it. He says, because
he's even more creative than I am. Jesus. I just got one up. That's, yeah.
I thought it was great. But in the same line of what you're saying, help me meet people, help me form relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. This is a tough question. I know I didn't give you sort of questions beforehand because, well, I don't do that. I'd love to know, when I was prepping, I'm like, I would love to know if you had one word to describe each of the generations, maybe starting with boomers.
Oh, this is a tough one.
Now, I know this is super hard, but it's fun. You can take your time. Like, what would it be? You've been doing this for 30 years. Like, what would it be?
Well, of course, I'm going to say Gen X, the best, but one word, best now. Oh, so one word for each generation.
Yeah. Boomers.
So with boomers, I'm going to say I would call it introspective. I find a very introspective generation that really kind of look back and think about the steps that they've gone through to get where they are today. And it's one of the things I really enjoy most. As I don't know if I mentioned, my dad is a baby boomer,
Mhm.
and it's one of the things I really enjoy most. I hang out with him, and
Mm.
his group is really listening to that reflection on the path, going from in their early 20s to where they are now. That kind of that path.
Love it.
Gen Xers, I would call them the most independent generation.
Independent. All right.
Yeah.
Nice.
And when I say independent, it doesn't mean that the other generations aren't self-sufficient. That's not what I'm saying. It's that Gen Xers really brought working from home. We really brought it into the limelight. As I said, when I started doing it in 93, there were very few people were doing it. When you told people you work from home, people still thought you didn't work.
Yeah.
You don't really have a job. But we really kind of, we brought that into the cultural focus. And millennials, what I think is so interesting about millennials is that, we always joke, or I joke, that we talk about millennials being so tech savvy, which they are.
Mhm.
However, that technology, the internet, that was invented by baby boom. Uh, but what millennials did, and maybe you can help me find the right word, what millennials did was help us really make the leap. So the technology was there. I mean, I remember the first time I logged onto a website, I actually entered the website and then I walked away because it was going to take a while to load. Like I walked away and got something to eat and came back and it still hadn't all loaded. So millennials really helped us make that transition of technology becoming really part of our work and our personal life. So I don't know, what would the word be?
I'm thinking adapters, maybe.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. So they really
They're plugging in. They're
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah. So they didn't. I mean, social media. We know that social media that started with Facebook, who was the guy was a millennial, but the internet, all that technology, that Apple. I mean, Steve Jobs, he was a baby boomer. All that started with baby boomers,
Right.
but millennials really did help us. Yeah, help us adapt, helped really brought into the cultural focus and helped most of us make that move and help us understand how technology could make our lives easier, not more difficult.
Yeah.
And in some ways, technology has made our lives more difficult, but in many, many ways, it's made it easier, really easier.
For
Yeah.
sure. How about Gen Z?
Well, now that's a really tough one because Gen Z is still somewhat new to the environment. But I think really what Gen Z is, they put such a high emphasis on mental health, and that is a real big result of COVID. So I really think they have self-awareness. Can we call that one word? Self-aware? I would call it a very self-aware generation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would love to know. So you mentioned this one leader who has this really progressive strategy around, take a picture, you go out, it's on me, like sort of encouraging, which is so, oh my God, it so hits the 50% rule, which is my book that's coming out. Well, it's coming to sale next month. The 50% rule essentially says anytime you're doing something new or you're got a big challenge, only do like half normal. Throw out, like, try to figure out what your intent is. Keep the things that other people have done that work, but then 50% bring in your own ideas. And it's more than just a mantra. Then I started to see people like Hamilton and Savannah Bananas and John Madden and Weird Al and all these people who really had success because they 50% rule. They took sort of half normal and half new. So when I hear that idea, because a big part of the 50% rule is stop when you're doing something and going through the motions and thinking about options, you often think of it's either A or B, or it's A, B, C, or it's A. This is how it's always done. But really think about the intent. And so what this guy did is what is the intent, right? The intent is to create collaboration. That's a big part of the, relationships, bonding that we're not getting when we're working at home.
Yeah.
And he thought, well, if that's the intent, what are some ways to do that? Screw the normal, right? Or only take half the normal and half the new. So there's all these talk about these generations. And then there's the practical in me. It's like, okay, Meagan, so what? Like, what are there other stories of companies that are doing things that are unique, that are actually taking this data, taking this information and doing something that, would really inspire our listeners to also do something cool and different?
I have an assisted living facility, which I would like to tell audiences, assisted living, one of the most highly regulated industries in the United States. So if they can do something different, anybody can.
Yeah.
He said, I got rid of annual reviews. He said, I got rid of them. He said, they're a waste of time. He said, because he says, the young people that are working for me today, he said, they think a nude paper at 24 hours is outdated. He said, so the idea that they're going to be engaged with content that could be almost a year old, he said, especially content that's so important about their performance. He said, it's a waste of their time. He said, it's a waste of my time. He said, so I got rid of them. And I thought, what a great idea, because they are a waste of time. And nobody walks away from an annual review.
It's always a disappointment. It's always a disappointment. Either you're told you did shitty, which is, of course, a disappointment. Right. Or for a lot of us high performers, it's like you spend a year trying to like impress the shit out of your boss. And then 10 minutes and probably the first question is, how do you think you did? And you're like, mofo, like lay it on me. Tell me how great I am. Did he replace it with anything?
He replaced it with a stay interview. And he said, the interview occurs within the first 60 days of employment. He said, then followed by every 6 months, they receive a stay interview. He said, I think there's something wrong. He said, so unless I suspect that maybe people, their morale is low, they're feeling disengaged, burned out. He said, because this is really hard work. He said, then we'll perform a stay interview. And he has an assortment of questions. But one of the questions he asked, I think is such a great question, was when was the last time you thought about leaving your job? And what was the cause of you thinking about leaving?
Brilliant.
And when I talk to audiences, I say, typically, when do we get asked that question?
Never.
And the exit interview. I said, when? So when you're leaving, it's too late. That's like, you're signing your divorce papers and you ask your spouse why. And the problem with, finding out the exit interview, the candidate is emotionally moved on, just like a divorce, you emotionally moved on. So, asking them then is good info because you can take care of the problem, but you've lost the good candidate. That's the problem. That's really the shame.
Yeah.
And he used an example. He said, we had a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. And he said, she was brilliant, and she said, residents, patients loved her, family members loved her. He said, she'd been working for us for about 4 or 5 months. He said, and all of a sudden, he said, there just seemed to be something off. He said, you couldn't say it was her performance because she came to work on time, she did her job. But he said that spark was missing. He said, we performed a stay interview. He said, we discovered that she had a transportation issue. And he said, by working with her and changing her hours, we were able to help her solve her transportation issue. He said, if we hadn't done that, he said, we would have lost her.
That's brilliant. And do you find that the new generations coming up and sort of the initial focus on, they're not going to take this, or they're not going to stand for that, or they need this. Do you find that it often creates innovation that actually helps all generations? Because obviously these stay interviews are
for everybody. Yeah.
Is it like almost like a catalyst? Like if you think about what do they need, the truth is it's probably a dormant need sitting in your other generations as well.
Oh yeah, it's very similar to let's look at social media. I mean, so nobody thought we all needed social media, but the younger generation brought it to the cultural focus, helped us make that transition, and now we use social media for a mini professional thing. I'm not gonna delve into, I think, some of the dangers of social media for the younger people, but professionally, social media is a good thing. I mean, it's an easy, inexpensive way to advertise your company, to show people what you do, to help recruit people, recruit new talent. So it's a good thing. So in the professional world, social media benefited many people across the generations, but the younger generation, millennials mostly, really brought it into the cultural focus. I remember a client I spoke to 10 years ago. I just recently spoke to their group again. But 10 years ago, I remember they were talking to people in the audience. we're talking about how to block Facebook. How do I block Facebook? Because I don't want my employees wasting time.
Right, scrolling. And then they're like, oh, how do I hire social media managers to exploit Facebook to make the work?
Yeah. How
Like,
do I get my younger people to help me with it? Yeah. just do it.
yeah.
So, yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you think Gen Z might rush in, might be a catalyst for? Any thoughts on?
AI, I think they're going to really help us with that whole AI transition.
Mm.
As one of my legal clients said to me, they said, what AI is going to do is going to help take the task that our talented people don't need to waste their time on doing, and they could spend their time. And they're again a group of lawyers, and they can spend their time on stuff that's important. And I think Gen Z, because there's so AI is still in that early stage in the professional world. Gen Z is going to help us with AI, just like millennials helped us with that social media transition.
Yeah, I love that.
Hey there, it's Erin. I'm just popping in real quick to ask you a question. Is there any chance you know someone who is looking for a keynote speaker for their upcoming event? Look, I know that many event organizers, they struggle to find a speaker who provides both tangible value and business knowledge, but that also lights their audience on fire. And I truly believe there aren't many speakers like me out there who are both former corporate executives and professionally trained speakers. And there's definitely none that roll in with an orange suitcase they unpack with their audience. Trust me on that. I would love nothing more than to bring my message of using authenticity as your strategic career and business advantage to people spinning in your universe, especially if you'd be there. I promise my talks always create an immediate buzz, but not just right after, but for months and years after the event is over. You can learn more about my message, style, and reviews, and share my speaking info by going to beauthenticinc.com/keynote-speaking. That's B, just the letter B, authenticinc.com/keynote-speaking. Or of course, we have it right in the show notes to make it easy for you too.
How do you suggest or examples or guidance on how companies create these forums so it doesn't just, they don't wait years for it to happen sort of organically? Are there some best practices of how to cross generation, maybe not just the younger teaching the older? Obviously, like you said, the older have a lot of reflection. Like, it was interesting when you said boomers are introspective. My first thought was, yeah, but do they always share it? And I don't know that they always do unless they're asked or prompted, right? They're where the younger generations might probably putting it on their stories on Instagram, they're like real time. So how do you facilitate that? What's the best way?
I mean, but just like you just said, I think especially when it comes to our more seasoned generations, it does require us to ask. I like to tell my audiences, I said, one of my audience members came up to me after the presentation and we were heading into the holidays. She said, as you were speaking, she said, it dawned on me that all of the Thanksgiving recipes that I love so much, she said, they're in my mom's head. And I realize now, if something were to happen to my mom or when my mom does, pass away, all that's going to go away with her. Yeah. And I myself, on a bigger scope, professionally, that's what's happening. You have baby boomers leaving the workforce just because of age and retirement. And I think many of them didn't want to really deal with the hassle that COVID presented. And so they were at a stage in their careers where they could, take their time and bow out. But that is just incredible knowledge that it's still there, but it requires us to reach out and really talk to people about it. And I have to remember that just even and I talk about this and I think about the baby boomers in my life. We just always assume they're always going to be there, but they're not, professionally or personally. So how important it is that we just ask them, talk to them about what they've learned, what they've done. Professionally, I've seen some of my clients have forums where they'll bring, I had a client, it was a group of architects. They said, we bring back our retired architects. We ask them to come have breakfast with us. We bring in our younger architects and we just have a real informal, breakfast meeting. They don't even call it a meeting. They call it a get together and where we just chat about stuff. And some of the younger architects have told me, they said, it's my favorite part is getting together and just talking about talking about being an architect and what that means and what it entails and some of the changes that have occurred. On a more structured format, I've had groups really have kind of a series of questions that they have the younger, they'll pair people up so they can bring in reverse mentoring and have some real structured questions about, what did you learn? What's different that you're doing today? How, what would you change in your career? You could do something different. And it's a more structured kind of conversation.
That makes me think even I could see one idea would be, even if it's just internal, like an internal podcast, so that, right? So having structured questions is obviously part of a normal sort of podcast media interview.
Yeah.
But then you get the one to many, get to hear it versus the one to one. So I wonder if companies, obviously externally, I'm a big advocate for too, because I think it helps your brand and stuff. But I think a lot of companies, aren't there. Or it's just not. But I think that would be a really interesting way to do it as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I love it. So two more questions. These are sort of standard questions. So we love to ask our guests if they could tell us a story about a time, you sort of bucked the norm. They call this the buck that question. So what's a time when maybe you said buck that, or you bucked the norm and really good things happened as a result?
I think about my own career right now where I'm at, and I call it, I said, I'm at such a perfect sweet spot. I am doing what I love to do, which is speak about generations. I love the topic. I have a great time with my audiences. But I don't dread any of my audiences, or I don't have that nauseating stress because I don't like a group anymore like I did back in my earlier career. Because early in my career, you say yes to everything, even when at least when I say you, I mean myself personally, that you might not be the perfect or the right match, but you want to check everybody's box. And what I've learned is that I'm not the right fit for all my clients, or people who are interested in hiring me. And it's not just, it's a two-way street, because I want to do a good job. I want them to be as happy as I am.
Yeah.
But that means we need to be a good match. And so to me, the bucking the trend was starting to say no to business that wasn't a good match for me.
Do you remember the first time you did that, made that decision?
Yes. I had a client that they were physical therapists, and it was a chain of physical therapy practices. And the owner, very driven, type A personality, kudos to him. And he was taking all the physical therapists, everybody that worked at all the different locations, and they were doing a tour, like on a bus, meaning like a tour bus, and they're going from location to location to look at the different locations and stuff. And he said, so I really want you to give a presentation to the group. I said, yeah, sounds great. He said, but what I want you to do is I want you to do it on the bus while we're in between locations, so they're not wasting time.
Like, I'm not Keanu Reeves.
What kind of that? Yeah, I mean, and they wanted me, like you when you're on a tour.
Like a tour.
That's what they wanted me to use, and I just said no. I said I'd be more than happy if we're in a controlled environment. I said, but I said that's not a good use of my talent. I said I'm not a tour guide. I said, you know what? I said, and your people want downtime. Yeah. Well, it's a waste of time. I said, well, there you go. So we both went our way. And I remember thinking, I can say no to business and it's okay.
Yeah.
In the beginning, at least for me, when you're young, you think, I got to say yes to everything. I can say no. And,
yeah.
And
I can relate with that. I'm much earlier in my entrepreneurial career, but, I definitely have had times where people have come to me really needing somebody to help them through, sort of a cultural shitstorm, right? They've got, backstabbing and, and it's just not the business I'm in. And so my line now is like, I don't take shitty to good. I only take good to great. And like, I can try to find somebody else. Although it's funny when you say I say no to things, I'm like, I am still sort of a speaking slut. So, send them my way if you don't know. But I don't think I'd do the bus thing either. If nothing else, I'd probably throw up. Like, right? Motionless and then That's funny. No, I think it's really important. And I think you have to find just an example and try it on for size, because it always sounds good. But then when you go to, you're like, oh, I can't do it. But then once you do it, and did you find that the sort of universe rewarded you? My guess is you had probably like 3 more offers, for speaking like, the next couple of weeks or something. And
It's just, like the world didn't end by saying no.
Yeah.
And just to take it even like further out, I mean, I have some wonderful clients. We have such a great time together. The event goes, and I
Yeah.
do, such fun. And then a year later, they call me. They want me to come back, and I'm flattered they want me to come back. I'm so, maybe I really enjoyed just even knowing them. But I've learned just you got to say no, because for me, I talk about generations, and I was like, well, maybe you could come back and just add some stuff about gender. Well,
Yeah.
there's kind of needed like, oh, okay, I could say
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
and I'll come back, and I think to myself, you're ending on a high note, kind of like when Seinfeld. You remember when Seinfeld ended? They ended on a high note. I said,
Yeah.
I know. And I've learned to say, you know what? I don't think I'm the right match for your meeting.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. You want to serve them. You don't want them. Yeah. You don't want to walk out instead of on the top. I love that. Well, before I ask you the final question, where can people sort of interact with you, follow you? What's the best place to go?
if you go to my website, there's a phone number on there. I still even answer the phone. Or if I don't, you can leave me a message and I return the call. Or you can go to my website and you can get on all my social media sites, and you can email me, text me, but at meaganjohnson.com. And then I'm all over the social media. But you want to spell Meagan, Meagan. Sometimes people get in there and they spell Megan, Megan, and then no, they find a different kind of site. They're like, ooh.
It's the one blessing. My maiden name was Erin Davis. And, I got married. Erin Hatzakostas, which is a horrific last name to spell. And remember, but then when I got into the space of entrepreneur and being speaker and stuff, like I was like, oh, I'm the only Erin, like SEO is not a problem. All right. Last question. Simple.
Yeah.
What if you had one last tip for our listeners to make work suck less? What would it be?
This is something I took on myself, that I started to find myself getting annoyed when I'd hear people say, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. And so I took that out of my language, that I'm too busy. Because I think to myself, if somebody were asking me to do something, let's say it was, go pick up the winning lottery ticket, would I be too busy? Yeah. And so that's kind of what I use that as my guide. So instead of saying I'm too busy, I think to myself, if this were, if it were the winning lottery ticket, you wouldn't be too busy. But really just making choice. This is what I'm choosing to do this because this is what either A, what I want to do, or B, needs to be done. And so I struggle with feeling in the moment. I always be like, okay, what else do we got? And that always just kind of grounds me. I think, okay, what am I choosing to do? Because either I A, want to do it, or B, it needs to be done. And that helps me be in the moment, which is
be in the moment and be in control.
Yeah.
Feel in
Yeah.
control at least.
Yeah.
Love that.
Hey, it's Erin with a teeny request. If you have ever gotten any value from this podcast and you'd like us to stick around, plus you want it to continue to grow so we can kind of swindle bigger and more knowledgeable guests to join us, and to keep providing you with tangible and inspiring actions you can take to achieve the career and life you deserve, could you please just take 1 minute to leave us a rating and a review? Those reviews go a long way in attracting guests to the show, and candidly, they really make Nicole and I's day. We see you. We really do. So when you have the time and inspiration, we'd love to see a rating and review from you. Thank you.